right. Happy Halloween, everybody, and happy week 9 in the NFL. Here to break it down, Shane Mercer of inplayLIVE. Shane is also the host of the Behind the Lines podcast on the platform formerly known as Twitter. You can follow him at Shane Mercer25. Shane, appreciate you joining the show. Welcome to Props and Hops.
Hey, Matt, thanks so much for having me on the show here. And thanks for the shout out to the Twitter handle there. I don't know that I'm the best follow. I don't do a lot of tweeting personally, but if anyone does want to reach out, that is one way to get at me.
All right, sounds good. And of course, following what you're up to on a weekly basis with the Behind the Lines podcast, a very safe bet for listeners of this show to check that out if they're not doing so already. And Shane, I love to start these conversations when having somebody on the show for the first time by just opening up the floor to you and getting more insight on your background in betting.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a lifelong sports bettor, which means I'm from Ontario, grew up in the Toronto area, started betting on sports at a very young age. So in Ontario, we've got a thing called ProLine. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but basically for anybody who's not familiar, ProLine is like our government-run lottery and gaming sort of outlet. So they, all things lottery related is done by the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. ProLine is specifically the sports betting aspect of that. And ProLine's existed in Ontario since 1992. And I think I might have made my first ProLine ticket somewhere around 1995. I would have been about 8 or 9 years old at the time. And, you get an adult to go in and buy it for you, kind of thing. Now, ProLine, very interesting at that time in the sense that you were forced to parlay. So you had to take at least a minimum of 3 legs on a ticket. You couldn't bet a single game. You had to take 3 legs on any kind of sports betting ticket. So, sports betting just very much ingrained in my childhood. I would take a toonie being in Canada and offer my toonie, my $2 to make a ProLine ticket on a somewhat, weekly basis kind of thing. And then try to hit like $20, or something like that. And then, as time goes on, maybe the amounts go up a little bit over time. But that's kind of, my early stages of sports betting. Then as I get older, still doing some of it and things are moving online and into a digital format. And I never really sort of did a whole lot of online betting, say in the late 2000s, early 2010s and that sort of time frame. I still kind of stuck with what I knew best, which was that whole OLG ProLine situation. And, of course, all of this is a pregame focus, which is very different than what I do now. But at that time, just having fun doing it. But I saw something that I had sort of been tracking with ProLine, and that was the pools offering. And so just to give you a quick sense of what the pools is, basically in any sport, in any slate of games, they'll offer an opportunity called pools. And what that is you pick every game, and you just pick winner. You just pick the winner. And so a slate, say an NFL slate, for example, this past weekend had 15 games. You've got to go and you got to pick every winner in every game. Now you can pay more. So a basic ticket is $5, but you can pay $10 to box a game, which means taking both sides of the game, kind of taking it off the list sort of thing. And then you can pay $20 to box 2, you can pay $40 to box 3, and you can pay $80 to box 4. And that's it. You can't box more than 4. So anyway, I was sort of following this, and there were some big prize pools back then. You could win upwards of $1 million on a pools ticket. It was a big, and the thing with pools is that you were competing against other people in the province. You weren't competing against the house, because what the situation is that everybody who buys a ticket is in and they build up the pool, and whoever gets the most correct, usually all correct, wins the prize pool. If one person wins it, they take it all. If 10 people win it, they split it. And so, you could win some decent prizes. And so it was actually the year 2013 at the beginning of the NFL season that I said to myself, I can beat this. I think I can win here. I think I can, have an edge here. And that also happened to be the year that I had my first daughter. It also happened to be the year I got married. And it was actually 2 weeks after my wedding, week 5 of the NFL slate, that I hit it. A $20 ticket, and it paid out about 26 grand,
Jeez.
which was a great hit at that stage of my life. Like, 2 weeks removed from our wedding, a child, living in Toronto, in the core of the city, and in sort of like a tiny apartment, 1-bedroom apartment. It was a pretty big win for me in that moment and at that time. And yeah, and it just sort of validated what I had sort of thought I had seen. Now, at the I'm still very much a recreational sports bettor at this time, who just kind of, thought he saw something and was right. And so funny enough, that actually inspired some other people in my family to start playing the pools. My dad, my brother-in-law, a few others. And 2 weeks after I won that, my dad won it, who knows nothing about
Jeez.
football. He won it. He took home 19 grand. And that was quite a time in my life and in my family's life. It was fun to be hitting that. So anyway, that's a little bit about my early kind of sports betting as a kid, and then into sort of a young adult kind of time frame there. Yeah, that's kind of a little bit of the background there, but obviously that's all very different than what I do now. I still do play the pools, and since then I have won it multiple times since then, but never to that amount. I've taken home, prizes $1,000, $3,500, $4,000 here, sometimes just a few $100. I've won it multiple times, but never for that amount.
So, how would you describe what you do today from a more process-driven perspective relative to what you were doing then?
Yeah. So, again, all of that very much from a pregame sort of standpoint. And, I did have a rudimentary process, but at that time, I mean, I wasn't tracking my wagers. I wasn't, practicing proper bankroll management. I wasn't doing a lot of the things that are foundational to finding success in the sports betting industry. If you want to be a successful sports bettor, there's a lot of things that you need to do, and you got to take it very seriously. And I wasn't doing any of those things. But I think what that did was lay the foundation for me to believe that you can win in this arena, which I think a lot of people out there either disagree with, they don't believe it. And I think a lot of the sports books, especially all the soft books out there, they want to condition people to believe that you can't win at this long term. Don't even try. This is just for fun. And I think I had already sort of, I think I was already open to the idea that no, I can win at this. I've already made some money doing this. And I believe that this is an arena in which you can succeed if done right. And I had also sort of dabbled a little bit in DFS at the time, sort of through the 20 teens. It was sort of new, I think maybe in 2014, 2015, and I was kind of getting into that and sort of just doing that for fun. But when I came across an ad for inplayLIVE, I saw this guy, Andrew Pace, who's the founder of inplayLIVE and my co-host on Behind the Lines. It was sort of like, and I kind of tease him about this, but he's is very like used car salesman-y, but at the same time, what he was saying made some sense, that you can win in this space, and there are ways to do it. And I kind of clicked on the link, and there were some videos there of him sort of explaining some of the basic concepts of value and how to identify value and expected, positive expected value versus negative expected value. And that all sort of made a lot of sense to me. This was in 2021 when I first came across the ad, but I didn't join right away. I actually emailed him though. And he responded to me like instantly. And it was just sort of an inquiry that went along the lines of, hey, is this for real? And can you actually make money betting on sports? And, or can you actually quit your job and bet on sports? And that was where my head was at the time, was leaving a role that I was in. which was a fantastic role. I don't want to knock my career choices at the time. It was great, but it was taking up a lot of my time and sapping a lot of my energy. And so I was looking to move on, and I thought, this might be interesting here, or at least a bridge between. But anyway, I didn't sign up. He responded to me, and his response was very a responsible one. It wasn't like, yeah, quit your job and come hang, come bet on sports with me. It was like, no, it's like, stack a bunch of cash, work with us, stack a bunch of cash, then quit your job. And at the time, it seemed like joining inplayLIVE was going to take up too much of my time, and I didn't have the time to commit to it. And so I left it. I didn't join. This was fall 2021, heading into the NFL season. And I said, I don't think I got time for this. And so I moved on. I ended up leaving that job, a really good, cushy, well-paying job for a sports technology startup. I went to that sports technology startup. I was with them for about 6 months, and it being a startup, there were some growing pains, and I got laid off in the summer of 2022. And so very shortly after getting laid off, I mean, I'm talking like within a week or so, I was like, well, I've got a ton of time here. Let's go check out this inplayLIVE thing again, and kind of go back to that. And I signed up and joined, and really kind of took it seriously. Haven't looked back since.
That resonates so deeply with me because I myself left a good, well-paying job in 2022 for a sports betting startup, and didn't make it 6 months. You outdid me there. I almost got to the 3-month mark before it kind of crashed into the side of a mountain, at least as far as my fate there was concerned. So I really get what you're saying about trying to juggle the balance of having, I don't know, the separation of church and state, as I think about it, having a good job in maybe a seemingly unrelated field versus going all in on this. And that can be a different equation for everybody. Mm-hmm. So in your mind, what was different when you went back to inplayLIVE the second time? And I heard you say really taking it seriously. Anything else that really played into the equation of setting the trajectory that things seem to have been on since then?
Yeah. So, just to be clear, I explored it, but I didn't actually join in 2021. I didn't press the button. I didn't join the community. So in 2022, I did. And very quickly, I realized, this is what it says it is. It's not because, that I'm sure you're aware in this space of sports betting and the various services out there, the touts, the people that want to sell picks, there's so much of it, and so much of it is just complete garbage. And it's really unfortunate, an unfortunate aspect of this business in this industry. So I was really refreshed and sort of invigorated with the sense that, whoa, this is exactly what it says it is. And it's a very sort of incredible community of sports bettors that you end up becoming a part of, where people are very much invested in your success and in the success of the community. And so I found that to be really sort of fascinating and intriguing and just sort of, just very refreshing in this space. And I think, part of it probably helps too, that the guys who founded it, Andrew Pace and his partner, Mark Rodgman, are guys from Vancouver, right? They're Canadians. I'm Canadian. There's a sort of a natural sense of trust maybe that comes in there. But on the flip side of it, some of the pros that were on there making calls and part of the community were Americans as well. And there's sort of this a cross-border camaraderie that was sort of taking place in the community at the time there too. And it was really impressive to see how many people were open to a cold call. Somebody just reaching out to say, hey, what have you done so far? How have you been successful in this space? What's working for you? And there were so many people that you were able to connect with and sort of just, pick their brains a little bit about how did you get here? How did you do it? And one of the things that sort of, I think, you can appreciate as somebody who was laid off and maybe looking for something else.
I was fired, so I'm not even going to play. Yeah, that was a totally different ordeal.
Well, there you go. As somebody who lost a job, though, right? You probably, can relate to the fact that, holy crap, I need money. I need to make some money. I need to make it fast, right? And wanting that fast money. and I think a lot of people who join In Play Live even now probably have some ideas or illusions of making fast money. But the people I connected with really made it clear that this isn't what we're about here. This isn't the path to long-term success. If you make some fast money, great, but chances are you're not. The goal is to make steady money, to slowly grow your bankroll. And while that was sort of maybe a tough reality, I was really kind of glad that nobody was trying to sell anything that was that wasn't real, right? It was look, here's the path. It takes time. It's not going to be easy. It takes an extreme amount of discipline and diligence when it comes to tracking and bankroll management, and staying value oriented. These are things that can be very, very difficult to learn and get under your belt. And it was no different for me. And those first 6 months that I was in Play Live were definitely a grind. I started with a bankroll. So this was my first time ever sort of saying, okay, here's my betting bankroll. All right. So I started with a bankroll and created a bankroll, and it was $1,200. I had a couple $100 in one account, one sports betting account that I had already had for a long, long time, a very sort of popular one. And I opened up a few more sports betting accounts because I started to sort of realize, though, you're going to need a whole bunch of different outs, right? You're gonna need a lot of different accounts here. All right, so I opened up some a few different accounts and put a couple $100 in each, and I had a starting bankroll of $1,200. And by the end of, this would have been July 2022. And by the end of 2022, December-ish, I had grown that bankroll to about $6,000 in that area. And so for me, but putting in a lot of time, a lot of hard work to get it there. And you could very much argue that, the amount of time I spent on this, didn't justify the $6,000 that I had made, or even in that case, $5,000, because I'd only added $5 to a bankroll of $1,200. So, grew the bankroll into the $6,000 range. And I was sort of, in the moment and at that time, it was hard for me to appreciate that success. Right? Because I was putting in so much work and effort. And to me, that wasn't enough, or that didn't justify it. Now, looking back, I can think to myself how foolish that was, because I 5x'd, 6x'd my bankroll over the course of 6 months in a space that is designed for you to lose. Right. And so I think that was perhaps lost on me in that moment at the time, but I can look back now and say, wow, that was actually really something. So all of this too is betting live sports, right? We are not betting on pregame. We are waiting for the game to start, watching, seeing what's unfolding in front of us, and taking advantage of opportunities that present positive expected value. And that can be a very sort of tough thing all on its own. It requires an extreme amount of patience, understanding what opportunities do present that value. And there's a lot sort of to learn. In Play Live has a whole bunch of strategies. I would say for every sport, every main sport, there's 5 to 10 different strategies that could be deployed on that sport. And so understanding those strategies and having a fundamental grasp on them, that alone takes a certain amount of time, and then seeing them in action and learning how to deploy them, can take some time. Anyway, so that takes us into 2023 and early 2023. And this is when things really took off for me. It was betting on women's college basketball. And some of the strategies involved with college basketball that the team and some of the pros at In Play Live developed. And when I saw them in action, it was like, whoa, there were some guys making calls and they just kept hitting and hitting and hitting. And I was like, what is this? How are they doing it? And really wanting to understand, not just tailing their calls. That's never been somebody that I wanted to be, was somebody who just tails calls. I wanted to fundamentally understand, what the heck are they doing here? And how is this winning at such a high clip? And so I put some time and effort into understanding the strategies involved with women's college basketball. And then I started applying them on my own. And I took that $6,000 bankroll, and by March, I had it up over 50K.
Wow.
Yeah, almost entirely on the back of women's college basketball, some men's college basketball in there too. And so, that was pretty huge for me at the time. And that really sort of validated everything that I had been doing since I joined inplayLIVE. And then since then it's been sort of steady as she goes, finding some other strategies, finding other things that work, capitalizing on the work of some of the other people in the community, while also doing my best to contribute when and where I can. A big part of my contribution to the community is the podcast. I have a ton of fun hosting it. I learn a lot hosting it. Matt, you've had a lot of sharp guests on your show, so I'm sure you probably feel the same way, where you learn from people
Definitely.
joining you. And I am extremely privileged to be able to have so many different sharp minds on our show, to be able to sort of pick their brains and learn from them as we go along. And it was in that sort of time frame when I was going on that run in women's college basketball that Pace and Mark approached me to start hosting the podcast, because I had some experience in the space, and I was helping them with some other media initiatives at that point. And sort of that's when we were like, all right, let's do it. And we launched it. And it's been great since. I mean, we're coming up on about a year and three quarters kind of thing, almost 2 years in the winter it'll be of us doing the podcast. So that's pretty cool. And that's sort of where I'm at now. I mean, I've grown my bankroll significantly since then, into the 6-figure space. It's just been a lot of fun, and it just takes a ton of diligence and dedication, patience, discipline, all those things to really sort of get it up there. And I think I know I maybe sound like a broken record in that sense, but I can't drive that home enough to sports bettors out there, because I think that those elements are just underappreciated in this space.
I think this all sets a great tone for the rest of the conversation. We can get more into specifically the way inplayLIVE operates on an NFL Sunday, look
Sure.
a little bit more generally at in-game betting opportunities, and also talk through some concepts that may apply to Week 9 betting opportunities. Shane, let's maybe use that as an opportunity to jump into Week 9 for a bit across the NFL. And as the name of the show would imply, I love to start with the props. I'll have one that I'd be happy to run by you in a moment for any of your thoughts.
Oh,
but
gosh.
I guess first I'd like to tee you up by asking about your approach to props generally. And I know it's still pre-game stage of the week, so maybe it's too soon, but anything that may be standing out for Week 9 specifically.
Okay, look, I'm definitely the wrong guy to talk about pre-game betting and specifically prop betting. I'll just come out there and say that. That doesn't mean that I don't, but here's like my approach to pre-game and props and parlays is now very much from a standpoint of I don't know much about this. I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about these things. But I have to do it. And I'll tell you why I got to do it. Because I need to keep books alive, right? I need to create some longevity out of these books, and a nice 10-leg player prop parlay. That's a great way to go about doing it. It's something that, it makes you look a little square. Hey, this guy doesn't only bet, on live this or live that, and kills us there. No, he's willing to go and throw together, some D-gen long shot parlay. And so I will go and make a few of those here and there. Lately, I think in the NFL, I like to go and have a look at sort of some anytime TD scores. I know that that's a very sort of popular market right now, and people out there love to bet the anytime TD. And so I'll typically look at, a few running backs, maybe in a good situation, where you think that they're going to get an opportunity to punch in a couple touchdowns here or there, sort of thing. If we're looking at the slate here, and I'm just pulling it up on my phone over here. If I'm looking ahead to the slate here, the slate ahead here, I see that, we have a high projection in the Atlanta-Dallas game. So, that might be a place where I go and I look at someone like Bijan Robinson, maybe for an anytime TD. maybe throw that in with, Derrick Henry is always a good look. And, I think their expected total, is up there in the high 20s for Baltimore. So, what are the chances that Derrick Henry accounts for at least one of those touchdowns? Although the odds are probably terrible on him. I mean, they're probably in the, I use decimal. So sorry if I'm not using American odds here, but maybe, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if his prop is something like, in the 1.5 range or minus, 175 or something like that, so high juice on that. I tend not to look at a lot of high juice. I want typically, 1.8 or minus 125 is kind of like my worst juice that I'm looking at for these. So even though Derrick Henry might be a good option, I probably won't look at him. Although New Orleans, though, they're looking like they've got a nice matchup there against Carolina. We love to pick on a team like Carolina. So a guy like Alvin Kamara might get rolled into an anytime TD prop. Anyway, look, I could go through the whole slate and pick out some of these guys. But let me just also belabor the point that I only do this, and I do it for significantly less in terms of unit sizing, significantly less than what I would do on a live wager. And I only do it because I'm hoping that it will extend the life of my sports books.
I appreciate the outside the box perspective there, and also the conversions you started sharing between decimal odds and American odds. Leave it to the American system, kind of like what we do with any other form of measurements, to give our own stamp on this, even if it doesn't make sense to what the rest of the world is already using. So as I was scrambling for odds conversion tools, you started to translate that for me. So I appreciate you doing that. And I would like to briefly follow up when it comes to props, knowing that typically this is an account longevity tactic for you. Whether it's your own personal philosophy or what the broader team at inplayLIVE is doing, is there any sort of perspective when it comes to in-game prop betting?
Oh, yes. In-game prop betting is absolutely part of the inplayLIVE repertoire. It's absolutely a tool that gets deployed. I won't sort of share the nuts and bolts of the strategy behind how we identify live props in game, but it is a fundamental aspect of what we do at inplayLIVE, is to bet on props live. It's one of the key strategies actually that's been around since I joined, and it gets deployed in almost every primetime game. So every island game, standalone game, at least one player prop typically gets called. And on a slate, like, on the big slates on Sunday, like the early slate and the afternoon slate, you might get one or two called on each slate, sort of thing. So yeah, it's part of it for sure.
I hear you on not wanting to reveal too much in a public forum like this. I will say, not being much of an in-game prop better myself, one thing I have heard is that if somebody is either at a game, has a contact at a game, or is watching closely, you mentioned the standalone games, we've got a lot more cameras. We can probably follow things a lot better than if there are 8 games going on at once, like an early slate on a Sunday. Sometimes something like maybe a starting running back is taking a series off, and you can see that the backup is coming in. Are there nuances like that? I almost think like an NBA parallel. If somebody knows, hey, Steph Curry is going to come out from, I should probably know this. Maybe it's the end of the first quarter to the start of the second, and this is a chance to get down on something else for a little bit. And if books are just going off a chart based on a pregame line and current game state, that could get lost in the shuffle. Am I at least speaking directionally along the lines of what you tend to look for?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're really right in there with the kind of, opportunities that present value where the sports books algorithms aren't accounting for something, right? That's what it is. And I think actually here's a great example. We just saw this happen the other night. We had the Rams in prime time against my favorite team. I'm a Minnesota Vikings fan. While I am a Vikings fan, I also am a big fan of Puka Nacua. He is on several of my fantasy teams, and I think Puka's a star. And we saw Puka get injured; he was out for a chunk of time. And in that game against the Vikings, a lot of the reports leading up to the game were that, Puka's going to play, but he's going to be really limited snap count. All the reports were saying that this guy was going to be limited, and I didn't play him. I left him on my bench because everything was saying he's going to be limited. And I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to go put this guy in, and he's going to get, a few snaps and maybe a target or two? Like, no, I'm not going to do that if that's what all the reporting is. Well, all those reporters were like fucking wrong, man, like way wrong, you know. And I was sitting there going like, oh, like cringing at it. But that's the beauty of betting live, is now here we have an opportunity. And one of the pros at inplayLIVE like called it out very quickly, where they were like, okay, Puka Nacua has been looked at least 2 or 3 times now, and I think he had 1 catch, and his receiving line is like 26 yards. And it was just like, we need to bet that. And sure enough, I mean, they went to Puka all game. I think there were at least maybe 2 or 3 more ads on Puka Nacua's receiving line, and they all hit. So yeah, to your point there, that is sort of very much in the direction of where we look in terms of live player props, opportunities where, you know, someone's getting the ball that maybe the sports books just weren't anticipating that person getting the ball that often. And a game scenario too can change, right? Like depending, maybe a game was expected to play out one way and it's playing out in a totally different way, which means that, you know, the losing team is going to have to change their strategy a little bit here and look in a different direction. And you know, we're ready to hop on that bandwagon, so to speak.
Well, I know as a Vikings fan, you didn't get the ending you would have wanted on that game last Thursday night, but I'm glad that from a betting perspective, there was some nice silver lining to it. And I'll run a prop by you involving the Vikings game again this coming week. I'm going to look at their opponent, Indianapolis, and Jonathan Taylor rushing yards under. The consensus line I'm seeing right now is 71.5. I'm seeing as high as 74.5 at FanDuel. And of course, this is Indianapolis at Minnesota on Sunday Night Football. Now, last week at Houston, Taylor's consensus closing line for rushing yardage was 66.5. I saw as low as 62.5. On one hand, you could say the upward adjustment this week makes a lot of sense. Last week, he rushed for 105 yards, including a touchdown on 20 carries. Anthony Richardson also ate into Taylor's workload a bit. Richardson accounting for 6 rushing attempts himself, maybe 6 more than Joe Flacco is going to have this week from the quarterback position for the Colts. And that could mean more volume for Taylor moving forward. But on the other hand here, if I look at this week over week adjustment, I see an opportunity going the other way. And this thought was kind of sparked in my mind when I heard Adam Chernoff breaking down this game on yesterday's episode of the Simple Handicap podcast. He mentioned that Flacco being under center for Indianapolis likely means an increased pass rate and also a decreased effectiveness in the run game without the dual threat that Richardson presents. My takeaway was that we could see fewer carries for Taylor and also less efficiency on a per carry basis. Plus, a bit of a free roll here, Indianapolis being a 5.5-point underdog at Minnesota. So if we look at that potential game state, Colts trailing late, likely passing more out of necessity. I'm guessing, Shane, that your heart's going to like this one as a Vikings fan. But as a bettor, any point of view on Jonathan Taylor rushing yards under? Let's say we grade this one at that consensus number of 71.5.
Okay. Look, again, I'll just state that I'm probably not the best person to ask about this, but I do like your thought process there. I think, you know, you're tracking in the right direction, you know, obviously in terms of the line being a 5.5-point dog for the Colts. Joe Flacco, we've seen come out and throw for over 300 yards. He can kind of do that almost on a consistent basis. I think that the Colts' chance at winning this game is going to be, you know, in the hands of Joe Flacco and having a great passing day. Also, you know, the Vikings defense can be very stout at times in terms of the run game. So look, I think that if you're looking at the under, first of all, also props, Matt, for considering an under and a player prop. That doesn't happen often enough in this space. You know, you look at all these touts out there, they're always calling overs, always calling overs. So, you know, props to you for you know, thinking about the under side of it, because yes, betting the under on
there are 2 sides to the coin.
There's always 2 sides to the coin. Nobody ever wants the other that wants that underside. So I think you know, you might be onto something there. Would I personally bet that myself? Probably not. Just because that's not what I do. But look, I think that your logic in coming to that wager is spot on.
All right, well, let's see if we can continue with some spot-on logic, looking at the rest of the Week 9 slate, thinking about other markets, Shane, sides, totals, teasers, derivatives, futures. Again, acknowledging that with this being Thursday, you'll probably do a lot more betting once games get underway on Sunday. Is there anywhere that you either do see value on the betting board right now, or anything that you'll be looking for particularly closely in the days to come before Week 9 kicks off in full force on Sunday?
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought up the teaser aspect of things, because that is something that we've sort of been doing a little bit on our show as of late. Having on one of the pros, John Wilson, Gosu, goes by the nickname Gosu, on to come and sort of break down the college football and NFL slates ahead. And him and Pace do a great job at just sort of having a look at things. And Pace is sort of somebody else who is also looking at teasers. He doesn't bet a lot pregame as well. If you ever asked him for a pregame pick, he'll tell you he'll wait for the game to start. But I know that he's been making a few teasers here and there also for book longevity purposes. So, a teaser parlay, stringing together a few of them. And we went through a few for this weekend on the show. Mm-hmm. A couple of them I think we were looking at was maybe teasing the Bills down, so that they're like a minus 2.5 to get them under that 3 mark, against they're hosting the Dolphins. Another one was same idea with the Saints. And now that the lines move significantly though, because Derek Carr is going to be back in. So, I think if you were to look at teasing the Saints also down to under 3, and putting that in there, so that they, if they win by a field goal, although they should probably cover that and more against the Panthers, I would think. Same thing with the Bengals, they're 7-point favorites hosting the Raiders. If you can tease them down to under a field goal, and you put those 3 together, you might start to be getting a wager that's in around even money. That might be something I would look at. These sort of big favorites, they're all sort of 7-ish, 6-7 point favorites, teasing them down to under a field goal, and looking at it at like that, putting the 3 of them together. Another one on the board here though is the Giants, 3.5 point dogs hosting a division rival. I know the Giants are just terrible. Daniel Jones hasn't been great as a team, in disarray, but I think if you got them up to 10, I think that might be a place in which, you might be able to take the Giants plus 10 against a divisional rival at home. Anyway, those are a few of the ones I think we were looking at there. Oh, the other one is the Bears. The Bears are actually dogs on the road at Arizona. Arizona's been playing great. Like, don't want to knock Arizona. They've been playing, incredibly well. But we look at the Bears coming off that loss in Washington, where they lost to the Hail Mary play. They were coming back in that game. It looked like they were going to win that game. If it weren't for that Hail Mary, they would have beat Washington in Washington. And now here they are, dogs, on the road. I think that if you could tease them, to a key number like a 7 flat, maybe, that might be something that you could roll into a teaser parlay.
I'll have more to say about Chicago, Arizona specifically, but when it comes to teams like Buffalo, New Orleans, Cincinnati, and the Giants, one thing that stood out to me initially was that none of these tend to fit that classic Wong teaser model of crossing through the key numbers of 3 and 7. But I don't mean that as a criticism, because one thing I've really tried to do in recent weeks and months is to just expand my own comfort zone with the thought process. It doesn't have to be a case where, hey, if you can't cross through 3 and 7, then you cannot tease that game. And sometimes games that could cross through 3 and 7 aren't necessarily profitable just because they fit what a model says. So as I try to become more mentally flexible to that end, I do still have that initial instinct of, we'd be taking Buffalo from -6 to pick them basically to win outright. New Orleans and Cincinnati from -7 to -1. So starting at the 7, but not necessarily crossing through it. The Giants from +4 to +10, perhaps. Like in that case, even with Chicago, you mentioned maybe taking them to a flat 7. What's your thought process when it comes to the fairly popular Stanford Wong teaser model crossing through those key numbers of 3 and 7 versus deviating from that path when you can identify certain spots where it may still make sense to you?
Yeah, I don't make enough teasers to be concerned so much about it, about going through some of those. Obviously, you want to be, you want to be keeping those key numbers in mind always, I think, right? But I know you don't want to tease through 0. That's something I don't want to do when I'm making teasers specifically. But crossing over a 7 or a 3, I think it just it depends on the game environment, I think, and what you think could happen. But again, like there's just so much prognosticating that takes place when you're going through all of that, and again, I just don't spend enough time worrying about it anymore. In the past, I might have, and I would have thought, oh, can they cover this spread, can they not cover this spread? But very now over the last couple of years, my main thing is, what, yeah, maybe, let's throw it on and see. It's very much based on what's happening in front of me here. Now, our live wagers do very much take those key numbers into account. But I probably don't have enough experience in creating teasers on a regular basis to sort of have any kind of significant opinion on whether you should cross through 7 or cross through 3.
Fair enough. Well, let me run a few options by you that you didn't already cover. I'll start with some 6-point teaser candidates for week 9 and see if any of these may stand out to you as well. I'll try to be quick here because we're looking at yet another juicy teaser slate. I feel like that's been the case for the last month or so. And it starts tonight. Houston up to +8 at the Jets. We're looking at evenly matched teams. No surprise to me if Houston wins outright. Also a bet perhaps against the Jets winning by margin, especially with the offense operating at a glacial pace, translating to fewer plays to amass said margin. So there's Houston +8 as a contender. We're looking at some Sunday games. Cleveland up to +7.5 hosting the Chargers. Again, no surprise to me if the short underdog wins outright, and that 7-point cushion has some appeal, especially against the Chargers offense that lacks explosiveness. Hesitation for me in this one, Jameis Winston seems to epitomize variance. No surprise if he throws for 3 touchdowns and or 3 interceptions, and teasers are inherently bets against variance. So maybe a fly in the ointment there, but I can't fault anybody for looking at Cleveland. Also giving a look to Seattle +7.5 hosting the Rams. Similar to that Browns handicap, no surprise if the short home underdog wins outright, giving some appeal to that 7-point cushion. It also feels to me like at this point spread, people are either buying the Rams high and or selling Seattle low, especially at this number in this setting. I will acknowledge some hesitation with DK Metcalf status up in the air, and he's probably going to be limited to some extent by that knee injury if he does play. And speaking of injury uncertainty, Green Bay currently could be teased up to +8.5 hosting Detroit. So we've seen some Packers money enter the market recently, an indication that perhaps Love is going to play, even if he'll be limited. But what gives me hesitation here is that quarterback uncertainty for the Packers. Love nursing a groin injury. I can confidently say this line won't close Detroit -2.5. I just don't know which direction it's going to move. If Love plays, probably the Lions a shorter favorite in the range of -1. If it's Malik Willis, the Lions probably laying somewhere in the range of 5 points by the time this game kicks off. 2 more for you, Shane, then I'll come up for air and see if any of these are resonating on top of what you outlined earlier. Looking at Philadelphia -1.5 hosting Jacksonville. The Eagles, the vastly superior team, at home, needing to do little more than win outright. And in a similar vein, Kansas City -2.5 hosting Tampa Bay on Monday Night Football. We're looking at the best team in the league, at home, last unbeaten team, needing to do little more than win outright to keep that unblemished record intact. Shane, all these games, in addition to what you noted earlier, did anything stand out when it comes to your perspective on some perhaps additional 6-point teaser candidates this weekend?
Yeah. Okay. So right off the bat, Houston, I love that. They're just playing. They're a good team. They're like the Jets for Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams and Breece Hall, and they just haven't been. They haven't put it together. And I think Houston, we are recording that this is Thursday. I think Houston can go in there and absolutely cover a touchdown. I'm think it'll be a close game still. I don't want to say Houston's going to win that game, but I think Houston absolutely has a chance to win outright, and to have them cover a touchdown. I like that. I think you're on when you talk about the Seahawks and the Rams game. I think people are very much buying the Rams after that big showing that we already sort of discussed, and seeing some of those weapons come back. And, Seattle had a terrible showing against Buffalo at home, but this is a divisional game. And, these things are going to be played tight. I see a 3-point game here either way. And so I think you're absolutely right to, think that the Seahawks can cover 7. I think that's what your number was, right? 7?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
this would be
7.
up to plus 7.5. So a Seahawks
Yeah.
loss by 7 would cover that.
Oh, so 7.5. There you go. You're getting that key number in there. Like I think that's I like that a lot. And then it's sort of the same kind of thinking with the Packers and the Detroit Lions. If we get Jordan Love playing, absolutely the Packers can cover a touchdown there. Or in this case, I think it's 8, right? So we're getting that extra point. I mean, again, a divisional game. This one's being played in Lambeau. The Lions are going to have to play outside. The weather's getting cold. It's not going to be, I know that the Lions have just been an incredible team, a juggernaut of a team this year. And we just saw what they did against the Titans. But again, that was the Titans. Like go do it on the road in Lambeau against a top divisional rival. Let's see. I think that game could end up being a lot closer than people expect. But if it is Malik Willis in there, I would probably leave that one off.
Yeah, and that's going to be one where people will need to act fast pregame if they get the news, or just wait, maybe some in-game opportunity. We can circle back on that later. But Shane, also 3 games is potential 6.5-point candidates I'd like to run by you for a moment here. Tennessee plus 3.5 hosting New England. On one hand, breaking that golden rule against teasing through 0. On the other hand, this spread is Tennessee -3, heavily shaded toward 3.5, circa at -120 VIG, bookmaker at -124. Teasers neutralize the VIG attached to the point spread. We're looking at about 7 points for the price of 6.5, including crossing through the 3 twice, essentially. Uncertainty here, quarterback uncertainty for both teams, and they're both bad teams, and that can increase variance. I guess I'll pause on this one, Shane. You talked about not wanting to tease through zeros. Does that just make this a deal breaker for you at face value?
Yeah, this game is like a write off for me when I go to make that pools ticket, because yes, that is one of the things I still do pregame is making that pools ticket that I referenced. When I go to make that pools ticket, this is a box. This is one of those games where I'm just going to pay that extra money to be like, I don't want to pick it. I'm taking both of these teams to win because, this is just an ugly game. It can go in any direction. Like I could see a blowout from either side. We could see, a 1-point win. Geez, this is one of those that could be like a 9-9 tie, goes to overtime and ends in a tie. Like it could be one of those kind of games. I don't want anything to do with it.
All right. And speaking of live betting, I'm looking to quickly get down on a prop bet if I can here while we are recording. Let me see if I can. All right. Thank you for letting me multitask for a moment there. It's somebody else's information, so I don't want to blow the cover yet.
Okay.
But it will be, we'll see if we can get a good outcome for Thursday night. Shane, looking back at the Sunday slate, a couple more 6.5-point fits that I'm eyeing. First off, Baltimore -2.5 hosting Denver. This one, I don't think you'd want to box out in the pool. You just want to maybe circle the Ravens in permanent marker in this matchup.
Yeah.
Vastly superior team at home, needing to do a little more than win outright. Currently a consensus line of 9, so a little extra VIG to get the 6.5-point teaser crossing down through the 3. How does that sound to you?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I like the Ravens here. They're coming off a loss against Cleveland in a very close game, back at home. I like you said, a vastly superior team. I don't think there's any denying that. But Denver's been frisky, haven't they? Denver's a team that can come out and just do some things that maybe you don't expect. I'm not sure what I think about Bo Nix at this stage, either. He's had some moments where he looks fantastic and other moments where not so much. Now, I think that this Broncos team has benefited from a pretty soft schedule to this point. And I do, I think that this is probably the hardest or the toughest test that they're facing, and I don't expect them to pass. But that's one for me where, on my pools ticket, I'm going to take the Ravens. I'm just going to move on and take that favorite. But it's here's the thing, right? You tease that game down. Like, I guess what I'm thinking is it worth teasing? Because I see, if that game's going to be decided by 3 points, then I want the Broncos side of that game, right? I want the value on the Broncos if I think that game could be decided by 3 or less, because the value on the Broncos is huge there. So I think for me, if I were building, I probably wouldn't look at a teaser situation there. I would either just play the minus on the Ravens because I think they're going to blow out the Broncos, right? Or, you know, if I think that the Broncos can make this a game and keep it close, and that 3 points is going to be the difference here, then maybe the value's on the Broncos. At least that's what I would think. I will not be playing the Broncos.
Somebody very smart and with deep pockets, maybe listening or just separately placing bets. I'm seeing circa now down to -8 for Baltimore. Some other books following suit down to 8.5. So maybe you won't need to pay the premium for 6.5 points. If you want to tease the Ravens, just take the standard 6-point teaser and leave it at that. Or to your point, if you lean toward Denver, no need to force the issue with Baltimore just because they fit a model. There can be much more to it than that. And Shane, one more option that could fit the 6.5-point teaser classification now. You touched on Chicago as an appealing candidate earlier. I would tease them for 6.5 points instead of just 6 in order to cross through the 7 up to 7.5 if I were to tease the Bears. And for this one, I see a parallel to Houston and the Jets, evenly matched teams. No surprise if the short dog wins outright. And something you touched on, I really thought there could be some recency bias in play here. Chicago, I'll admit, they were thoroughly outplayed for the majority of the game last week at Washington. That would have been a fortunate win for them. But I can't help but wonder what this spread would be if not for that Hail Mary, especially if Arizona didn't also overcome multiple double-digit deficits at Miami, including a 9-point fourth quarter deficit on the heels of a fortunate win 2 weeks ago hosting the Chargers on Monday night. So to me, if Chicago's 5-2 instead of 4-3, and if Arizona is 3-5 or 2-6 instead of 4-4, with no other changes beyond the 1-loss record, no other changes to the underlying performance of these teams, I doubt Chicago would even be on the table here as a teaser option. My hesitation here is that there is a pretty significant discrepancy when we look at strength of schedule. I tend not to give that too much weight, but thus far, sources I trust indicating the Cardinals have played the toughest schedule in the league so far. The Bears, the second easiest. I think that was noted on today's episode of the Dream Preview podcast. So how much does the recency bias, which would favor Chicago, weigh out in your mind compared to the possible strength of schedule discrepancy that would favor Arizona?
Yeah, that's an interesting one there. The strength of schedule thing, I think, it can be skewed, I think, right? Because you don't know who you're getting and how they're performing in those moments. But, I'll say that, like, both teams here are on, I would say, sort of similar trajectories where they're in tight divisions, right? They're in divisions that are like the NFC North is the best division in football. It is. By record right now, it is. And the Bears are trying to hang in that division. They're the worst team in the division, but they're not a terrible team. And the Cardinals are, I think they're sitting at the top of the division because of tiebreakers and that kind of thing. But everybody in that division is like 4-4 right now. And so I think you just have two teams here on very similar paths where they have real playoff aspirations. They, at this stage of the season, they can both make it in. And they're playing, similar styles of football, if you want. I mean, kind of, in the sense that you've got these sort of dynamic quarterbacks that are dual threats, offenses that maybe don't have the biggest named weapons, but they're finding ways to use them and put up some points. So, I mean, to me, this is, I think the line is probably right on it. You have a home team here that, isn't worth the -3 at home, right? The sort of typical home favorite -3, right? They're maybe not worth that. So but maybe have a slight edge, or you want to call this game a pick'em, and I think the line is at a pick'em, and so I think teasing the plus side of the pick'em is probably always the better idea.
A lot of food for thought here when it comes to this week's teaser slate. I think if I'm to distill it down, I geared toward more of the 6-point candidates we discussed earlier. I specifically like Houston +8 at the Jets tonight, Seattle +7.5 hosting the Rams, Philadelphia -1.5 hosting Jacksonville, and Kansas City -2.5 hosting Tampa Bay. Now, for a lot of the audience, there might not be as much interest in a 3-team or 4-point teaser. The payouts can be advantageous relative to what you get for a 2-team teaser, but there can also be a lot more variance. You're going to win those bets less frequently because you're relying on more things to line up in your favor. So I'd say among those 4 teams, I plan to have exposure on all of them in some way, shape, or form at the end of the day. I'll just note from a pricing standpoint, if you're looking to play a 2-team teaser, -120 or better is the price cutoff. I know DraftKings in the regulated market still offers it. Offshore, -120 more prevalent. Shane, I'm not sure what it's like in Canada. Is -120 on a 2-team 6-point NFL teaser somewhat widely available at the very least?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You can get that for sure. Yeah. And we've got, especially in Ontario, we've got access to all the same books you've got. All those soft books, we've got them.
Good to know, because if we're looking beyond the 2-teamers, there are also options when you shop around at different books, especially soft books. You can see a lot of variety in pricing for 3 teams or 4 teams. I'd say in a 3-team NFL 6-point teaser, look for +160 or better. And a 4-teamer, look for +250 or better. And with 4 teams that really appeal to me this week, I think in some way, shape, or form, again, Houston, Seattle, Philadelphia, and Kansas City probably going to be a core part of the Week 9 teaser portfolio.
Can I just make one point there on the books? I just want to mention that Pinnacle Sportsbook is a sharp book, probably the sharpest sports book in the world. But they offer some of the best odds when it comes to these kinds of things. You can make your teasers over there, and I bring them up. I don't know how many people in the United States have access to them, but for any of your audience that might be outside the United States, or if you are in the United States and you want access, you could always reach out to myself. I might be able to help finagle that for you. But Pinnacle Sportsbook absolutely always has the best odds on these things. That teaser you referenced coming in around -120. I bet you that would probably pay even money at Pinnacle. They just always seem to have the best odds on these things. They're the sharpest book in the world, but they take some of the least vig out there. And I would just suggest for anybody out there to go and explore them.
I appreciate that shout out. Part of me is envious because as an American, Pinnacle has been off the table for me for as long as I've been betting, but there are creative ways, to your point, to get down if you want to maybe think outside the box there. That might be a follow-up for me to take after this conversation. But yeah, especially for sharper books, when teasers give you a chance to bet into market efficiency, that can really be the way to stack the deck in your favor, if you will. So yeah, whether it's Pinnacle or other books that'll give you a fair bet at better odds, then that's absolutely something worth considering for the price sensitive bettor, or really for any bettor who wants to improve their ROI over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, price sensitivity is a big part of it. So you want to get the best odds.
For sure. And Shane, moving on from yet another extended version of teaser talk on this show, I know we covered some good ground off the top on inplayLIVE. And I guess before digging too much deeper into some questions I have for you as far as how you and the team there operate, could you just tell us a bit more about how it operates and its value proposition to various types of bettors out there?
Yeah. So, I mean, value propositions very much, embedded in identifying value live, positive expected value on live wagers. And I think, for people out there, and Matt, for you, for your audience, I think the value proposition would be the ROI. So you talk to a lot of sharp sports bettors, a lot of the best pregame sports bettors in the world. If they have a 5% ROI, and I'm being generous here, right? If they have a 5% ROI, like, that's amazing, right? They love that. Mm-hmm. Right? That is an incredible ROI for a pregame sports bettor. And kudos to anybody hitting that. I think most successful pregame sports bettors, their ROI is more in like the 3% range. And even that might.
And we're talking mostly like NFL sides and totals. The most efficient markets, even the
most efficient markets, absolutely. But even like, even the prop markets, I think the ROI is still probably single digits, right? I don't know that there's a lot of pregame sports bettors out there betting in props that are getting more than a single digit ROI. But then yes, those main markets are significantly lower. And I get that 5% for a sharp pregame sports bettor with a massive bankroll can be totally worth it. And they can grind out a living doing that. Have at it. When we bet live, some of our strategies, Matt, and this is going to sound perhaps unbelievable to you, to some of your audience members. We have strategies with ROI 20%, 30%. We just actually talked about our NBA ROI from last year and the end of last NBA season. So think like playoffs and the time leading up to playoffs, call it, March through the end of May, 44% on our NBA ROI. Think about that for a minute. Okay.
As you say that, my first thought, I mean, it sounds like this was a complete season, so the sample size probably is reasonable. But when we're talking 20%, 30%, north of 40% ROIs, what does that sample size look like?
It's usually in the hundreds of wagers. And that's the other side of this, right? Is that when you bet live, the volume of opportunities increases dramatically because we break a game down, right? We don't look at a game in terms of 4 quarters, right? And we're going to make a bet in the first quarter on the outcome of the game. We break things down. So an NFL game, for example, here, you asked me earlier about like what a Sunday might look like, right? Well, here's what a Sunday might look like at inplayLIVE. First of all, there's a live stream, right? The live stream is on Zoom. You get a Zoom link. You join the live stream. The pros are all there. Pace fires up the music to get everybody fired up and ready for the slate, and then boom, slate, music comes down. We start to dial in. And the first things we're looking at are first quarter outcomes. We're not looking at making a bet on the game in any game, right? So you got the full slate of 7, 8 games on that early window, and we're looking for opportunities in the first quarter. Where can we find these opportunities in the first quarter? We might get 1 on a slate of 7 games. We might get 8 on a slate of 7 games. We might get somewhere in between that. I would say typically it's somewhere in between that, 4 or 5 opportunities on that first quarter. Okay. First quarter nears an end, coming to an end. Boom. We start looking at the half. Okay. What can we do in terms of the half here? Are there opportunities to be had in the half? Same thing in the third quarter, right? And then not until we're in the fourth quarter are we looking at anything that is a wager on the game result, right? So typically a pregame sports bettor is taking one play, like we just went through, or maybe a bunch of teasers or something like that, but you're taking one play for one game, and that's the game result. But on that same game, I'm getting 5 to 10 opportunities potentially on that one game. And then I'm getting it for every other game, and so the value proposition, as you put it, is exactly that there is just so much more value to be had in a live game scenario and environment, especially when you have strategies that have been proven and tested over time that you can deploy in these various game scenarios. So you talk about sample size and your question about sample size, you can understand how we can quickly build a sample size, and how a sample size can grow really quickly. I mean, I don't think I would judge anything unless the sample size is a minimum of 50. Like I know for me personally in my tracking, I don't make any sort of decisions about a particular bet type or strategy or wager type until I see a minimum of 50. But even then I want to see 100. I'd rather see 100 of them and really have a look at it. But some of these wagers are more than that even. They're in a couple of hundred.
And as you describe this environment with a pretty fast-paced live stream community gathering, I am also envisioning possibly looking at odd screens, models, using the eye test. Within all these different dynamics, what are you using? What are you watching for most closely? Okay,
so eye test is big. Like we're talking eyes on the game here, and I try to get as many eyes as I can. And screen real estate is a big part of our community and figuring that sort of setups, right? Like what's your setup look like? Believe me, my setup isn't just my laptop. Right, I've got a couple computers, I've got monitors attached to those computers, I've got handheld devices, and of course I've got a TV. But my setup is probably far less sophisticated than a lot of other members' setups who have had a little bit more time to invest in their setups. And Pace's setup is insane. I don't know if you've ever seen it. It's nuts. It went like viral in the past, and it's racked up millions of views and that kind of thing. But I've seen his setup in person too. Like I've been in his apartment and seen his full setup in his condo. It's sick. It's just awesome. But he's got every game on imaginable, or every game on that we need to track. He's got it. and then the other side of having that being able to apply the eye test is latency, right? The conversation around latency is huge in what we do, because, you know, if you're like, you know, the game is happening, the sports books are latent by only maybe a few seconds, right? But if your feed is like 30 seconds behind, you're behind the 8 ball. You're going to have a hard time. And I guess the point here is that that's where being able to rely on a community is so incredibly valuable, right? Because, okay, my feed is going to be 20 to 30 seconds behind what's actually happening on the field, right? On the field of play. But Pace's isn't, right? His is right up to speed, as low latency as it comes. Sometimes it's like he's ahead of the sports books, okay? And then there's several other pros who also have feeds that can potentially be ahead of the sports books, and they're calling things out, you know, like, oh, huge play, Kansas City, right? Okay, boom. You know, the line is about to change here. We were already dialed into something and focused on something and thinking about taking something. And then somebody is able to call out big play. You know, you're like, okay, boom, click, right? Get it in, take, you know, deploy strategy now, you know? So that's a big part of it. So for a lot of people out there who just don't have the time, money, energy to, you know, invest or even space, maybe, right? Like, you know, these screens can all take up a lot of space and that kind of thing. If you don't have that, that's where being able to rely on the community is such a big aspect of things. So yes, a live eye test, and these are ways in which the live eye test sort of works for us. Modeling for live sports betting, not as much. Now we, you know, have some pregame sports bettors that are in the community who do a lot of their own modeling, and they will let people know what their modeling is telling them before the game. But we sort of just use that as sort of like, okay, you know, that's what's expected. We'll see. You know, we'll see what comes of it. And maybe a game is fitting into the model, and that's like, okay, hey, this is fitting in with so-and-so's model. You know, maybe here's where we can find some value. But then, you know, I would say we find some of our best value when it's not going according to model, right? And it's not going to what was expected. That's when we are really able to capitalize. So that's a part of it. You know, and then, you know, just really sort of looking for areas in which the books are just not pricing things appropriately. And that's where having, you know, access to so many different books can be really beneficial, especially if you have, you know, access to a couple of sharp books and you're able to just look at, okay, here's where the soft books are just wrong, or they're just off, or this number isn't correct, or, you know, these odds are too high. And, you know, you can do, you know, some really great opportunities there with, you know, arbitrage and middling, if that's what you're into. So, you know, there's a lot of people in our community who are taking advantage of those things.
And I'd imagine a lot of the sharper bettors in your community have dozens of accounts. But for somebody who might be a bit newer to this, and I like to think of the term Rec Plus as a bettor. I think that's a phrase that Drew
it's pretty common phrase.
Have used on the Deep Dive Pod, or a lot of others have used it as well. Captain Jack Andrews calls it the aspirational sharp, if you will.
Yeah, sure.
If somebody's early on in that stage of things, about how many accounts would you recommend for somebody to give a serious attempt at live betting? And how would you classify perhaps the different range of accounts that their overall portfolio should be composed of?
Hey, that's a great question. Okay, so, you know, I think there's maybe this perception that you need to have like 10 accounts. And I don't think that that's true. I think if you're just starting out and you're Rec Plus and you're just sort of getting your feet wet here, I think you could really actually do some significant damage, grow your bankroll with 4 accounts. And that's manageable, right? We're talking about live betting where things are moving fast, you know, like I can't stress that enough. The speed at which things are happening, especially in like a high volume sport like college sports, like college football. There's a full day college football stream that the team at inplayLIVE does. It's like a 14-hour day with all of this, you know, all of these games taking place. And then, you know, the other big one is college basketball as well, where the volume is so high. We're talking 100 games taking place in a single day, right? So this getting up to speed can be a bit of a challenge at first, and sort of, you know, keeping pace with things. And then when you add in, you know, you think you need to have 10 books open all at once, that can just be really overwhelming. And so I think if somebody was just starting out and they're a Rec Plus better, as you kind of put it, and they want to be better, and they're just sort of getting their feet wet into the sort of sharp arena, I think if you had 4 books, that would probably be a really good start. Now, those 4 books would all need to be different odds providers, right? That's I think perhaps what people might miss there is that, oh yeah, I've got 4 sports books, but hey, they're all Canby odds providers, so all your odds look the same, right? You got to really make sure that you have maybe one sharp book in that mix. I would suggest Pinnacle Sportsbook, but there's some other really great sharp books out there. I think you referenced Circa earlier. If you have access to Circa, if you have access to Bookmaker, if you have Prime Sports, I know the team over there, Joe Brennan and Adam Bjorn, guys we've had on the show and had great conversations with them. Love what they're doing. So if you try to get yourself at least one sharp book, and then let's look at 3 other, soft books with different lines. So maybe like a BetMGM, DraftKings, FanDuel, mix it in with one of those. Maybe get yourself a Canby. So I'm not totally sure what the US market Canby books are. It's always different. But I guess what I'm trying to say here is, you don't have to get a whole bunch of books all at once. But what you need to do is get 4 different odds providers and figure out who the odds providers are, and then make sure that you're getting some different lines based on that.
I will say I appreciate the shout out to Prime as well. I am so fortunate to get to host a weekly podcast with Joe and Adam, kind of taking people behind the curtain of what's going on within Prime Sports. So yeah, they're in Ohio
that's awesome.
and New Jersey right now, a few other states around the corner, and hopefully plenty more beyond that. So for any US-based bettors catching this conversation, definitely keep Prime on the radar, as they hopefully before too long are in quite a few more markets. And Shane, one thing you touched on in those initial remarks earlier, there's a lot to unpack from those remarks, but I guess one question I have top of mind right now is, you talked about the setup people have, and really being intentional about how your screen real estate is allocated, how many screens you even have in the first place, how everything gets configured. And when I think of not even necessarily a full college football or college basketball slate, but even an NFL Sunday where there could be 8 games going on simultaneously, thinking back to the privilege of a lifetime, getting to know the late, great David Malinsky, he would talk about only really preferring to keep eyes on 3 games at a time, because any more than that, and it could be more distracting than productive. It could affect his decision-making. How do you view the balance between wanting a setup that gives you eyes on everything versus wanting to make sure that you can be paying enough attention to any one game to capture any edges? To your point, it moves really fast, so to capture those edges as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So, I early on, I think I had to reconcile that I am not going to have all the feeds, and I'm not going to have the fastest feeds. And, as soon as you sort of come to grips with that, you're like, okay, but here's what I can do is I can put on Red Zone, so I can get access to the various games and at least these key moments, throughout, and I can have that up and running. I can have, a few games that maybe I flick through on a screen. But then, let my team tell me what's happening. Lean on the team. That's why I belong to a community. That's why I'm part of a team, right? So that I can benefit from it. By leaning on them in those situations, for them to have those eyes. And, I can watch the sports books too, right? And just sort of see, like, they all have those little tracker things and everything like that. So I can sort of stay in tune like that. Like, okay, so-and-so's got the ball here, they're down over there. It's 3rd and 1 at the 50 or whatever the situation is, right? That's playing out. So I can sort of split my eyes, but I'm really using my ears for a large portion of it as well, to just, what's the team saying? What are they saying about what's happening where? And then, if something sort of piques my interest, then I can quickly tune into it in some way, shape, or form, whether I have it on screen or I have to go to and sort of dial into the book to see what the book is showing there.
And I guess on the flip side of games that may pique your interest, I would love to run something by you that I heard yesterday on the Bet US NFL show by Steve Fezzik. He noted that there can often be a lot more in-game betting opportunity in games that generate less interest. For example, he referred to New Orleans, Carolina as the game of the week this Sunday, and he wasn't entirely kidding. How does that track with your approach?
Love it. I think he's spot on there. That is great analysis from some of our best games are the ugliest, most gross, disgusting games that are on the slate. There's so much value to be had, especially when that game wasn't expected to be that way. But when it is expected to be that way, there's still plenty of opportunity there. And yeah, you know, a lot of those markets may be less efficient because people are shying away from them. So I absolutely think he's onto something there. And you know, you mentioned sort of sports or, you know, teams with less interest. You know, we started this show at the beginning. I told you I grew my bankroll really rapidly betting on women's college basketball. So I think that tells you what I think about sports and teams and, you know, events that have less interest. I'm interested.
Yeah, and it seems like interest in women's basketball has skyrocketed since you took that approach. So hopefully that's serving you well. Maybe more liquidity in markets where it could have been tougher to get down before. So as your bankroll has grown, it hasn't hopefully hamstrung you as much from that perspective. But Shane, if we want to stick with the NFL here, another potential game of the week that is generating a lot of interest, whether that's something people want to bet before kickoff or after, I think especially in-game could be interesting. Looking at a matchup like Detroit-Green Bay, Payne on the Bet the Board podcast earlier today brought up an in-game angle that a close game could be okay for the Packers if it's Malik Willis at quarterback, but they wouldn't want to rely on him if the Packers are facing a multi-score deficit where a one-dimensional passing offense could neutralize his athleticism as a runner. So I guess specifically to this game or a bit more broadly, what's your point of view on games like this where there is meaningful quarterback uncertainty pregame?
You know, I would just say that uncertainty breeds chaos, and we're here to capitalize on chaos live. You know, absolutely, like that's a, you know, a big part of what we're doing. I mean, sports is chaos. That's a big part of why we break the game down into smaller segments, right? Eliminate the chaos, eliminate some of the variance in there, you know, remove it, as opposed to, you know, trying to pretend like you know what's going to happen. You know, that it's really kind of just that plain and simple. So when you talk about, you know, uncertainty at quarterback, yeah, I mean, look, if Malik Willis is in there, you know, then okay, Malik Willis is in there. I mean, maybe they're not going to be as effective on offense, and this game is kind of just going to go in Detroit's way, and maybe there's some opportunities there, right? Maybe there's an opportunity there with Detroit's team total. You know, if they're going to have the ball a lot, we know they like to play fast. We know that they're just going to keep trying to score. We know that they could be up, you know, 35-0, and Dan Campbell's still going to want to air it out. You know, that's kind of who they are. And so there might be some opportunities that way. Let's say, for example, it's Jordan Love, and we're in a much tighter game. Maybe, you know, this is a game actually where I think the public in a big way think, like, let's say Jordan Love plays. Okay. I think the public perception then would become, wow, this is going to be a close game. This is going to be a shootout. Right. But it's in Lambeau, and it's getting kind of cold out right now. And these are divisional rivals who know each other. Like, they really deeply know each other. And what if it's not a shootout? And what if Green Bay's defense has really come up with some excellent schemes to slow that Detroit offense down? And what if, you know, same thing on Detroit, that they're realizing, holy crap, this is going to become a much more defensive oriented game. Then you might get a lot of value on no first down. You might get a lot of value on a punt. Right? Or you might get a lot of value on a quarter draw or something like that, you know, where you're going to bet against team scoring. I'm not saying that that's what's going to happen, but these are the kinds of things. This is sort of the way that we sort of think about a game and maybe look at a game.
I really appreciate that open-minded approach, and I think it might connect a bit to a common pregame talking point that I hear from bettors, where they might look at a number and it's not quite what they want, and they could say, oh, it's all good, I'll wait to get better odds in game. And that doesn't necessarily sound like the way that you and the inplayLIVE community approach everything. But when I think about that notion, I'm like, yeah, you might get better odds in game, but as it's detailed, I think, very eloquently in the logic of sports betting, you'd be getting those odds in game because of what has already transpired on the field. So those odds aren't necessarily better than the pregame offerings. What's your point of view when you hear somebody kind of eschew a bet pregame thinking they'll just wait to get better odds in game?
I think if you had like a lean pregame, like we'll stick with this Detroit Green Bay game. Let's just say, for example, you had insider information that suggested that Jordan Love is going to play this game. Okay. So now all of a sudden you feel like, okay, maybe the mass public thinks that and the books all still think that it's Malik Willis, but you are certain that Jordan Love is going to play, and you think there's a ton of value on the Packers side. Okay. And the game starts, and I guess my question becomes, well, what you didn't like the money? Maybe you didn't like the line though that you were getting. What is the line right now for the Packers? Let me just pull it up here.
I think we've seen some Packers money come in as we've been talking. Yeah, it's down to
that's
Detroit,
right. You mentioned
minus 2.5.
So it's minus 2.5, and Green Bay is like plus 145, so 2.45 in decimal odds, right? So let's just say that you don't like that. You want Green Bay at 3.0. Okay, so what needs to happen in that game for you to get the 3.0? Well, you probably need Detroit to come out and score, right? You probably need the Packers to fall behind a little bit, right? Would you still like the Packers if they were now down by 3 or down by 7 to take that 3.0 on the game in the first quarter? Now, look, I get that might be something that a sharp bettor might do and might look at, and maybe they're onto something there. Right. I don't want to sort of just poo-poo it and sort of say, that's bad logic, because who knows, maybe they're onto something there. But what I would say is, if you want to bet a money line on the game, how about you wait till 5 minutes left in the game and see where the game's at, right? And see what's happened so far. And maybe the Packers are still in that game, but there's only 5 minutes left and they need to score a touchdown to win. And maybe in that scenario, you're getting them at 7-1. That's something that I might look for if I was inclined to be on the Packers side.
And when it comes to whether it's Detroit, Green Bay, or any of the other NFL games taking place this weekend, I want to circle back on a couple of things you touched on earlier. Then we'll start to round the corner in this conversation. I could go all day, and I'll try not to give these final few topics short shrift here. But one thing you touched on was the volume that can be available to you when you're identifying in-game opportunities. And I think that really magnifies the importance of disciplined unit sizing, knowing that in-game can be much higher volume. That probably calls for a different kind of bankroll management than a lot of listeners have heard me talk about on this show over the years. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on bankroll management from the in-game versus pre-game perspective?
It is going to be very, yes, there's going to be significant amount of volume. But obviously I welcome that volume. I'm here for the volume. A pregame bankroll, I don't know, because I've never really approached sports betting in a professional way from a pregame standpoint. So it's hard for me to say. Maybe you have a better sense of what a pregame bankroll and bankroll deployment might look like. Like, a full unit for a pregame bankroll, would that be 2%? Would that be 5%? I don't know. I know that for a live scenario, we look at a full unit call as somewhere in the area of 2.5%. Depending on your bankroll size. Now, for some of our bettors, some of our pros, for them to get 2.5% down can be very difficult. We're talking, $20,000, $25,000 on a 2.5% call, right? A full unit call for them. And that can be very difficult to get down live. But for somebody who's betting significantly less than that, you may want to look at even maybe a little bit more than that, than a 2.5%. But typically, we kind of preach 2.5 to 3% as a full unit, and 1% maybe as like a quarter unit, or just under 1% as a quarter unit, something like that kind of an approach. Sometimes too, a great sort of way to kind of ease in, if we're going to talk to that sort of rec plus better that's just getting their feet wet, just go 1% across the board. 1% across the board all the time, 1%. That's a nice way to get your feet wet and understand, learn strategies, see what works, what doesn't, what provides higher ROI, what doesn't. And then once you sort of have all of that kind of tracked and accounted for and built sample sizes, then you can sort of start to deploy your bankroll in a more dynamic way. That's at least how we sort of approach it live. What would you say is a I'm curious. What is a pregame? What does a typical pregame sharp unit sizing look like?
I think those percentages you spoke to tend to track, and I am hesitant to get Too specific, because I am not a professional sports bettor, and even the pros I've spoken to, they all have different approaches. So
Yeah.
to each have different bankrolls, different philosophies, different
Sure.
risk
Okay.
tolerances. So I think the percentages you mentioned do track more broadly to the pregame side of things as well.
Okay.
And I hear you that while you want to be mindful of the volume, if you're in it for the volume from an in-game standpoint, then you also don't want to be perhaps too conservative and put a firm cap on the upside that you could unlock otherwise. So when you speak to 2.5% being a standard unit in game, I think earlier you mentioned there might be times where you could get upwards of 7 or 8 bets down in the first quarter of a game. That's probably a rare scenario. But if we're talking 8 games going on simultaneously and several bets just in each quarter, I think, okay, if 2.5% is a standard unit, your full bankroll is essentially 40 units. And it seems like with this kind of volume, it's possible to get damn near the entire bankroll in play on a single day. Am I onto something there? That's something that's accepted because of the quick grading of a lot of these bets and the edges that you see, or what might I be missing there?
I was going to say, so you get the quick grading, right? So your bet's going to win or lose within that time frame, typically, 5 to 10 minutes, right? Or 5 to 10 minutes of game time, which might be only 15 to 20 minutes of real life time. And some of our basketball bets, they win and lose literally within 5 minutes of real life time. So that's sort of something to kind of keep in mind, that your money isn't deployed for that for a significant amount of time. So something to keep in mind there. When you talk about 8 to 10 bets on so let's say the first slate on an NFL Sunday, we've got 8 games on at once. I wouldn't say that we're going to make 5 bets in each game in the first quarter, but we might make a total of 5 quarter bets. So 8 games on, 1 bet in this quarter, 1 bet in that quarter game, 1 bet in this one, and get up to somewhere in that range. In which case, the bankroll deployed might be, closer to 10 or 15%, depending on the number, right? Like you might have that much of it in play at one time. So that's sort of it is a significant amount, and sometimes you're putting a lot of your bankroll in play, in a moment there. But I want to stress the fact that it's not all in play on 1 or 2 wagers. You've got a good portfolio of wagers that it's deployed on. So if you and depending on the odds and the average price you're getting on those two can matter a lot as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think of a parallel as somebody who has primarily bet pregame, oftentimes on Super Bowl Sunday, between the lead up to the game to edges that might pop up on game day. That's a day that I think a lot of bettors, if they really do like something and want to get in play, hopefully they're not just betting because it's the Super Bowl, but if they do see a lot of edges, it's the biggest game of the year, the most liquidity. So that is a case where you might see accounts near zero prior to kickoff. But to your point, hopefully you've got a diversified portfolio. And I think there's a level of risk tolerance necessary to a bettor who's going to do that, because even if the portfolio is diversified, you need to be able to stomach the worst case outcome before you willingly place any one wager. And at the same time, if you want to unlock as much upside as you can, sometimes it takes going out on a bit of a limb. So there's I guess, a strong mentality needed when it comes to risk tolerance and all of this. I didn't mean to ask that question in a way to say that anything was irresponsible, but more to get a feel for, okay, how do we do this, and how does the disciplined approach align with the approach of wanting to also be aggressive where opportunities may call for a little bit more aggression than usual.
Yeah. And you know what, I should point out that we sort of approach that from the idea that we're calling a full unit, or that the pros are calling a full unit on those plays. A lot of times they're not. A lot of times they're calling quarter unit plays or half unit plays. That is like a quarter unit is, I would say, the standard call at inplayLIVE. Like typically it's like, we think that there's value here. We believe there's value here. We believe that over time, this bet will yield a positive ROI, but it's not maybe like a premium opportunity. Quarter unit, right? Quarter unit. Then, over time, maybe you've taken a whole bunch of those quarter unit bets and you're saying, oh, hey, this is actually yielding some significant ROI here, 15%, 20%. Let's up our unit size to half units. Right? It makes sense to up our unit size here. It's giving us a solid ROI over time. We'll start same bet type, same sport, wager, everything, right? Up the unit size to maybe a half unit. A full unit call is rare I think, we might get on a Sunday, on an NFL Sunday, typical NFL Sunday, there might be 1 or 2 full unit calls throughout the whole day.
Got it. And to your
Yeah.
point about looking to maximize the ROI, of course, as part of this whole equation, you mentioned account longevity earlier when you spoke to how you'll often play player props and maybe parlay a bunch of things together to maximize account longevity. When I think about it from a more strictly in-game perspective, on one hand, I like to think there could be the benefit of closing line value not being measurable in nearly the same way as it is for pregame wagers. And on the other hand, if you win enough, most books still are going to limit you or shut you down at a certain point. So how would you describe your point of view on maximizing money-making opportunities in the present while also maintaining the ability to get down in the future?
Yeah. Okay. So this is a tricky one because I think it very much depends on who you are, where you live, right? That's going to be a big part of it. Like, some states have access to significantly more outs than others.
Sure.
Right. So this question is going to depend on who you are and where you live. And then on top of that, your own personal network, shall we say, right? And your own ability to, create more accounts, for lack of a better term here. I'm lucky in the sense that I live in a jurisdiction that is fully regulated, has a long history of sports betting as sort of part of its culture, and my access to books is bigger than most. I've got access to at any given time, like 40 regulated books. And then on top of that, all of the offshores and all of the gray market books, if I want to go in that direction. And so, while I do some of these, while I do plays to maintain account longevity on certain books that I really like, I'm not scared to burn books either. I like to often say I'm actually in the book burning business. And I'm happy to burn a book, and if I get 5 or 10 dimes out of that book, then that's fine. That's plenty. I'm moving on. Thank you very much. Goodbye. See you later. And I'm moving on to the next book. And hopefully making some money for some other people along the way too, which is kind of nice. That's a good part of this whole game too. The people that you work with, whatever you want to call them, whether it's beards or buddies or whatever you want to call, those people. It's nice to be able to help make them a little bit of extra cash here and there because they're helping you out by helping you provide you with books. So, I think that question though does very much depend on who you are, where you live, what your network is like, all those types of things. You've got to make those decisions on your own. I would say I'm probably on the side of less not conservative at all and willing to burn books all over the place.
I think those are some really good distinctions you call out when it comes to the thought process behind something like account longevity. And one more distinction I'd like to make, circling back to something we spoke to earlier, perhaps the difference between live and in-game. And these terms may seem synonymous, so pardon me if this is an exercise in semantics, but when I think about it, truly live betting can be very difficult. As you touched on, for a lot of bettors, there's an information asymmetry where books are often going to be ahead of you when it comes to data and TV feeds. So I often use the phrase in-game to refer to betting during the game, but only during stoppages in play when information asymmetry is less of a risk. What's your point of view on betting truly live versus in-game, given that framework?
Yeah, I think that is a great sort of distinction that you're making there, because when that play is taking place, I would say it's a double-edged sword there. When play is taking place, and a lot of these books, you've got to have like accept all odds if you want to be able to spin in.
Right.
You got to have those things going for you. And sometimes you could spin in at really shitty odds. Like let's just say you thought you were getting even money, and they spin you in at minus 150. That happens every once in a while. But the flip side of it too is that you can often sometimes spin in much more significant, higher odds on a wager too. And, when you talk about always being behind the books, I don't know that that's necessarily always the case. Like these books aren't as fast as maybe they want to think they are. There's especially, again, when you're working with a team. right? It's one thing if you're trying to do it all on your own. That's a hard thing to do, right? That's going to be really difficult. But when you have a team and like, oh, this pro's latency is like extremely low. I mean, they're almost at the game. They might as well be at the game. Then that when they call something out, that you will actually be ahead of the books on that. So there's two sides to that there. And then I think, the other aspect of your question, though, about waiting, sometimes it's really beneficial to wait and wait for that timeout. Basketball is a perfect example of a sport where if you're trying to spin something in when they're running up and down the court, like that's going to be hard. It's going to be very difficult for you to get the line you want at the odds you want. Waiting for a timeout can make a huge difference in those moments for sure. So I think especially basketball, that's one where I would strongly encourage anybody who's just, new to this Rec Plus, just trying to figure it all out. Like, wait for the timeout. Like, it's coming. Wait for a foul. Wait for the timeout. Then, spin your line.
And Shane, whether somebody's looking to bet on basketball or football or anything else for that matter, based on some of my homework I did for this episode, checking out inplayLIVE.com, it looks like there are two ways for this audience to join the community. One would be to subscribe, and a second way would be to join inplayLIVE's team of analysts. And if this is correct, I'm wondering if you could describe what the audience could expect from both options, and specifically when it comes to the latter one, where someone should consider starting if they're hearing this conversation and they're interested in possibly joining that team of analysts.
Okay. I don't know that joining the team of analysts is really sort of open for everybody. Like you're talking about, like you want to be a pro or you want to come and join the team of pros.
It looked like there was a lot of flexibility, maybe in line with what you had described a few years backwards. Like you can start out kind of part-time, do as much or little as you want, and maybe ramp up from there. But maybe I was misreading things, or maybe that is from an earlier era.
In order to become sort of part of the team, a part of the pros that are making calls, you would need to join, become a member, then display, have some sort of serious success behind you that's been tracked. Gotcha. And, you have a positive ROI. Like those pros are vetted. You're not going to be able to just come and join and do that. But there are two tiers to inplayLIVE. There's members and then there's pro. Members is essentially you join, you're part of the community, you have access to some streams, but not all streams. You're part of a Discord group that is a members only Discord group, and a lot of a great value in there and an opportunity to connect with other people. But, I myself, I belong to pro. I would strongly encourage most people to join pro. It does cost a little more. It is a higher price point, but you're going to have access to everything at inplayLIVE. You're going to have access to every stream. You're going to have access to the pro Discord group where you're going to be able to connect with a lot of sharp minds and sort of pick their brains. So I would strongly encourage people to go the pro route for a membership. And yeah, you just get unfettered access to everything at inplayLIVE. It's by far the way to go, in my opinion.
Got it. Well, Shane, a couple of non-sports questions for you here as we round the corner. One could be similar in terms of the process people take to sports betting. Next Tuesday is Election Day here in the United States, as I'm sure everybody is well aware. Yes. And if I recall correctly, you could have gotten 10-1 on either candidate at various times on Election Day in 2016 in the U.S. Wow. And even in the range of 3-1 on Joe Biden on election night in 2020. I feel like you could argue there are edges there for the taking if you apply a sound process similar to sports betting. What's your perspective, or perhaps anything you've gleaned from the inplayLIVE team when it comes to betting on elections?
Well, look, I mean, I'm sure that there's going to be value to be had out there on election night, and the team over at inplayLIVE will never hesitate to seize an opportunity, especially, in something like that where the value, could be significant depending on the situation. And so I'm sure, there'll be people looking for things and spotting things and trying to eye things up in terms of the election night, but I think the election's taking place on a Tuesday, if I'm correct. I believe it's next Tuesday. Yeah. So, that's also a pretty big hockey slate So I'd imagine that a lot of our eyes are going to be on the hockey games that night, where
that may be very advantageous. You'll probably have a lot less competition than usual.
Hockey's a big sport for us over at inplayLIVE, so there's going to be a lot of eyes on the hockey games that night. But there's probably also a lot of opportunities at different books where they're probably going to be offering all sorts of boosts or perks, incentives, whatever you want to call them, inducements of sorts, out there, where they're going to have odds boosts maybe on a particular candidate, or maybe state to state they're going to have opportunities there. So I'm sure that there's all sorts of arbitrage opportunities that'll present themselves for live betting the election, if that's something you're looking to do. I mean, like I could probably see some great middling opportunities in the election too, right? Where it's like, oh, maybe you take one candidate for the popular vote and you take another candidate for the electoral college vote, and win both. It's like there's probably going to be plenty of opportunities out there. When it comes to the election, is this the kind of thing that I personally would be spending a lot of time thinking about or worrying about? Probably not. But look, if I'm sitting there and I'm betting on sports, and all of a sudden somebody says, hey, there's this great opportunity over here on the US election, I'm not going to hesitate to click the button.
I love it. It reminds me of people talking about, I think Spanky has referenced, whether it's the Super Bowl or a Bethune-Cookman game the same day, the money all counts the same. So if there's an edge, and be open to it. I also hear you on maybe not focusing too much on that if there are other opportunities and edges to be had at about the same time. So Shane, pivoting maybe a bit further from sports, but not entirely out of the sports betting realm. I know we talked off the top about some career similarities we had. And unfortunately, I will say the last 2 years since my sports betting startup experience crashed and burned in seemingly no time, the last 2 years have been the best of my career. And it seems like things have been going quite well for you at the same time. And beyond that, we also have backgrounds in journalism, as I understand it. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yours and perhaps any skills you see as transferable between journalism and sports betting.
Yeah, I mean, look, hosting the podcast and hosting a sports betting podcast, I mean, I'm leaning on my journalism career there and my background in journalism, especially, when I'm interviewing our various guests. So that's a big part of it. But looking at things objectively, right? I think that's a big aspect that crosses over. If you can't sort of, I'm a fan, absolutely, right? Like, I'm a fan of my sports teams, but when I'm engaging in the betting arena, I put my fanship to the side. And that's why I was able to bet on Puka Nakua's receiving yards against my team, because I don't care. I'm here to make money in this moment at this time. Okay. It would be great if my Vikings could have won and we hit Puka, but hey, whatever, right? So being able to take an objective look to everything all the time and just eliminate bias and recognizing bias within yourself, right? It's very easy for all of us to think that so-and-so is a good team, this team's a bad team, or variations of that along the way. But I think if you're able to just kind of, eliminate as much bias as you can and look at things objectively with an open mind, I think that is a incredible skill to have, and I'm thankful that I was able to develop that and work on that early in my career as a journalist. Big part of what we do, right? I think that's a big aspect of it all. But I've been a journalist for coming up on 20 years. So a long time, still a journalist. I still have a day job. I work as a journalist as part of a day job, not in mainstream media, but I spent the vast majority of my career in mainstream media in Canada. I'm actually kind of glad to not be in mainstream media anymore, where the US election would have been a huge thing for me over the last few months, and certainly leading up to election night, where it would be like all hands on deck. It's kind of nice to just sort of not have that in my life at this stage of my life. There was a time when I really, really enjoyed that sort of stuff and really kind of, enjoyed that adrenaline and just, it was really sort of an exciting opportunity and time to be a part of something like, to be part of history, so to speak. Right. In some small way, shape, or form. But now at this stage of my life, I'm quite happy to not have, big world events impact my day-to-day life as a, as a dad and husband and, family guy. It's just really nice in that sense, to be able to sort of have that separation there. So I would agree or concur with you too, that since I got laid off, it's been the best couple of years of my life.
That's great to hear. And I want to run with that last point you mentioned about having healthy separation in different aspects of life. This is where I'll weave into typically what would be a deep dive on the hops. I know that for myself and many others, enjoying beer in moderation can be a nice way to unwind, but unwinding doesn't have to involve beer necessarily. So Shane, beyond the hops, what would you say it looks like for you to unwind and pursue the most balanced lifestyle that would be suitable to what you're looking for?
Yeah, I mean, look, we all have to, I think we all got our vices or, our things that we like to do to sort of take the edge off and relax a little bit. Myself, I've been a regular weed smoker since I was in my teenage years. I still am, although I don't smoke maybe, or the traditional way. It's more vaping these days and that kind of thing. But that's one of my big things to kind of just to take the edge off a little bit. I don't mind a drink here or there. Admittedly, I'm a lightweight when it comes to the drinking side of things. Sure. Always have been, but I do enjoy a good beer here or there. A Guinness is nice in the winter. I don't mind a nice lager in the summer. But if I have to have a drink of choice, it's usually a nice single malt. I am a big Scotch guy. Enjoy a good glass of Scotch. Neat single malt. That top shelf stuff. Love it.
Nice. Well, one of my mantras has been there is a time and place for every drink. And it sounds like you've got a lot of good bases covered, even if that's not necessarily a key part of the day-to-day. So it sounds like a very well-balanced perspective as far as that goes. And if there's a time and place for every drink, Shane, there's also always a time and place on this podcast for the final pillar of the show, the Malinsky Minute. And having you on this week, I thought of the notion that everything affects everything, and tying that in with Dave, from enjoying his favorite food from Lotus of Siam in Las Vegas to getting off the grid, as he would put it, to take hikes on Mount Charleston. He realized that he was at his best as a bettor when he was also at his best in other walks of life. And I recall on the Behind the Lines podcast about a month ago, hearing you reflect on a tough betting start to the season when also dealing with multiple conflicts in your personal life beyond all things betting. And I'm inclined to think that correlation was perhaps more than just a coincidence, because on one hand, life can be inherently messy and it's important to compartmentalize. But on the other hand, I do think there's a lot of merit to that notion that everything affects everything. So Shane, ultimately, how would you describe your perspective on balancing these seemingly conflicting concepts?
Yeah, I mean, look, I would first say that, yeah, I do think that, everything can affect everything if you let it, right? And so you've got to be able to say to yourself, yeah, this isn't going to bother me, or this isn't going to affect me. And then on the flip side of it, though, sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes things are going to affect you, and yeah, I'm glad that, you brought that up. And that story that I shared a few weeks back on Behind the Lines. That was sort of a moment where, yeah, I'm impacted regardless, right? It doesn't matter that I'm going to say that, that thing is over there and over here I'm betting on sports, because while I'm setting up my computer betting on sports, I'm still thinking about that thing over there, and it's bugging me, right? And it's weighing on me, And I just think, you gotta, when it comes to betting on sports and focusing on that, you need to make sure that you are in a positive state of mind and that you are ready to stay there and not get too high or too low, regardless of what happens when you're engaging in that arena, because it can be a very emotional thing. And that is where, this whole game can throw you off course, and it can go both ways, right? It's like you hit a whole bunch of bets in a row. You think you're the absolute shit, Teflon Don, nothing can hurt you, and you're ready to just start firing full units at things, right? And then boom, what's going to happen? lose, 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 boom, there goes your profits, right? And on the flip side of it, right, you go through a losing stretch, you're like, this sucks. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't win anything. I should just walk away. And maybe in those moments, you should just walk away. Absolutely. There's a time to just walk away. Just be like, put it down, take a breath, take a walk, take the rest of the day off. Don't bother with it. But then also, you want to make sure that when you are calm, refreshed, that you're not letting those previous losses get to you in a way that it's going to blind you from the next great opportunity, right? That's a big aspect. And I'm not saying that these are easy things to do by any means. These things take a lot of practice, a lot of trial and error, a lot of just experiencing it and doing the wrong thing. And, that happens, and so, yeah, I think that these are things that probably a lot of bettors have to kind of grapple with on an ongoing basis, right? You have the stresses of life and everything else that comes with it. And then here you are, trying to make a significant amount of money. You have to approach that money in a way that, it's not going to impact your day-to-day life if you lose a whole bunch. But also if you win a whole bunch, you don't want it to be the kind of thing that is going to affect your day-to-day life. You want it to be the kind of thing that, okay, well, that's my bankroll and that's just what it is. It's over there, and not have the emotions that I think maybe we as a society attribute to money, right? It's a lot. It could be a great source of happiness if you have a lot of it, but it can also be a great source of stress and anxiety and frustration and sometimes anger, and you gotta really just sort of separate all that emotion away from that. And, a big part of how I try to do that is, I mentioned I'm a dad. I got 3 daughters. I got a wonderful wife. And a big part of it is always just remembering that, money is one thing, but it's the people in your life that matter more than anything else, always, every day. That having those people in your life, whoever it is that's out there that loves you, that you love back, having those people is really all that matters. And if you can sort of just be thankful on an ongoing basis and be grateful that you have those people in your life, it makes it easy to stomach a few losses betting on sports.
Well, Shane, you've brought so much to the table over the course of this conversation. Can't think of a better perspective to wrap things up here. To the audience, want to thank you for tuning in and wish you the best of luck with your Week 9 bets. Hopefully less tricks, more treats as far as this week's results are concerned. You can follow Shane on Twitter at Shane Mercer 25. Also catch him on the Behind the Lines podcast. And to learn more about the inplayLIVE community, check out inplayLIVE.com. Shane, once again, thank you. This has been a long one, but a very good one. Really appreciate your time and insight today.
Matt, thanks so much for having me. This was a lot of fun, great conversation. And I would encourage all of the audience out there. You can hit me up on Twitter at Shane Mercer 25, as Matt mentioned, but I would encourage you, all of you on your socials, to go check out at inplayLIVE on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all over the place. Head over there to learn more about how to become a long-term winning sports bettor.
All right. Well said. Thanks again, Shane.
All right. Take care, Matt.